There's a plant most people spend every spring trying to kill, pulling it, bagging it, spraying it out of existence. That plant outperforms dairy for calcium, and it's not the only one. There's something in your spice cabinet right now with 9 times the calcium of milk. 9 times. Most people own it and have no idea. There's a leafy green, something people grow for a completely different reason, where the part most gardeners compost turns out to be the calcium source. 2 harvests, 1 plant. Nobody told them. There's a plant almost nobody in this country has ever grown on purpose. Dry the leaves, and a single teaspoon carries more calcium than a glass of milk. We'll get to that one. I spent 20 years as a registered nurse. I know what the dairy aisle says. I also know what I found when I started actually looking. 16 plants today. Real numbers from USDA FoodData. Nothing invented, nothing sold. Some of them are already in your yard right now, whether you know it or not. Wait for number 8. That's the one that stopped me cold the first time I ran the numbers. Sesame seeds. Small enough to slip between your fingers without you noticing. And they happen to be one of the most calcium-dense plant foods most people will ever have sitting in their pantry. Gram for gram, whole sesame seeds carry somewhere close to 975 milligrams of calcium. Milk gives you about 113 in that same 100 grams. That's not a small gap. That's roughly 8.5 times more. Here's a detail I didn't know until I went digging into the research myself. Most of that calcium lives in the hull, the little outer shell most commercial sesame seeds have had stripped off before you ever see the jar. Hulled seeds still carry a fair amount. Unhulled seeds carry a good deal more. You can grow sesame yourself if you've got a long, hot summer. It's an annual, it likes things dry, and by late summer the pods split open on their own and just about beg you to harvest them. I've grown a small patch 3 summers running now, more out of stubbornness than good sense, since an Oregon summer isn't exactly what sesame dreams about. One word of caution, and I mean it. Most of the oxalic acid in sesame lives in the hull, the outer shell. Hulled seeds carry considerably less of it, but sesame is still on the watch list for anyone who's had calcium oxalate kidney stones, and that's a conversation worth having with your doctor before you start eating them by the handful. For using them, I like to toast mine in a dry pan for a minute or 2, until they smell nutty, then grind a spoonful into whatever I'm cooking. Toasting wakes the flavor right up. Simple. If whole seeds aren't your thing, tahini, that's sesame paste, ground down smooth, still carries a meaningful amount of calcium, though the number depends heavily on whether it was made from hulled or unhulled seeds. Unhulled tahini runs higher, closer to 400 milligrams per 100 grams. The more common hulled version from most grocery stores lands lower than that. Check the label. Either way, a spoonful stirred into a salad dressing does the job without anybody noticing. It's there for the nutrition. Sesame is one of the oldest cultivated oilseed crops in human history. People have been pressing oil and grinding paste from it for something like 5,000 years, long before anyone had a word for calcium at all. They just knew it kept people well. Chia seeds. Most folks know them from smoothies and those little terracotta pets from decades back, and not much else. But there's more history and more calcium here than that reputation lets on. 100 grams of dried chia seeds carries about 631 milligrams of calcium. That's better than 5.5 times what the same weight of milk provides. And unlike milk, it comes bundled with fiber and plant-based omega-3s that dairy simply doesn't have. These were a staple crop for the Aztec and Maya peoples long before anyone in Europe had heard the word. Runners and messengers reportedly carried them for the road because a small handful, mixed with water, would hold a person for hours. That's not a modern marketing claim. That's documented history. Here's the part that surprises people. Chia seeds soak up nearly 12 times their weight in liquid, and when they do, they build a gel around themselves. That's not a defect. That's the whole trick behind chia pudding, and it's also why a spoonful in your oatmeal thickens it right up without a bit of flour. Was it my grandmother or her sister who first showed me chia pudding, way before it had a name people put on menus? Goodness, it's been a long while. Either way, soak a few tablespoons in milk or a plant milk overnight, and by morning you've got breakfast waiting on you. It grows as a warm season annual, tall and leggy with little purple flower spikes, and it'll do fine in a large pot if your growing season runs short. Rare to see it in a home garden. Worth trying anyway. One honest note on the omega-3 front, since I don't want to oversell it. The omega-3 in chia is a plant form called ALA, and your body only converts a small portion of that into the forms it can use directly, the kind found in fish. Chia's still a good source. It's just a different kind of good source, not a straight swap for salmon. All that fiber and gel-forming ability makes chia genuinely useful for keeping things moving along in the digestive department, too, a quiet benefit that gets less attention than the calcium and the omega-3s, but matters just as much day to day. Stinging nettle. The plant nearly every gardener in this country has cursed at least once, usually after brushing against it in shorts. And it happens to be one of the richest calcium sources growing wild on this continent. Fresh nettle leaves carry somewhere in the range of 400 to 600 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, depending on the study and where the plant grew. Even at the low end of that range, you're looking at roughly 4 times what milk gives you, weight for weight. It's not just calcium either. Nettle brings along a real dose of vitamin K, which matters more than people realize. Think of it this way. Calcium is the raw material your body needs to build bone, but vitamin K activates the proteins that actually anchor that calcium into the bone matrix. Without it, some of that calcium ends up drifting into places it has no business being. And I'll give you the caution up front, because vitamin K is exactly the nutrient that matters if you're on blood thinners like warfarin. If that's you, talk to your doctor before you start eating nettle in any real quantity. It can work against the medication. About the sting, it comes from tiny hollow hairs on the stem and leaf underside, and heat destroys them completely. 1 minute in boiling water or a good long sauté, and the sting is gone entirely. What's left tastes something close to spinach, with a little more backbone to it. Wear gloves when you're harvesting. I learned that one the hard way, more than once, before it finally stuck. Foolish of me, honestly, but I still go back for it every spring, because it's some of the first green thing up out of the ground where I am. Nettle isn't just a food plant either. During the First World War, when Germany's cotton supplies ran short, nettle stems were processed into fiber and woven into cloth, including army uniform fabric. A plant most of us only ever curse turned out to have clothed people in a pinch, and there's something quietly remarkable about that. Dried nettle leaf also makes a genuinely pleasant tea. Mild, a little grassy, nothing like the sting the fresh plant carries. Steep a small handful of dried leaf in hot water for 8 to 10 minutes, and that's about the simplest way to work it into a routine without cooking anything at all. Dandelion greens, the single most fought against plant on the average American lawn, and one that's been eaten on purpose by people who knew exactly what they were doing for a very long time. 100 grams of raw dandelion greens carries about 187 milligrams of calcium. Call it a bit more than 1.5 times what the same weight of milk gives you. Not the biggest number on this list. Still real and still free. Growing in places most people spend money trying to get rid of it. The bitterness in the leaf isn't a flaw, traditionally speaking. Bitter greens have been used across a lot of different cultures to signal the digestive system to wake up and get ready. The bitter taste itself triggers something in the mouth and gut that gets digestive juices moving before the food even arrives. Beyond the calcium, dandelion greens carry more vitamin A and vitamin K than most people would ever guess from a plant they've spent years spraying out of existence. Was it my grandmother who taught me to blanch dandelion greens twice in 2 separate pots of water to take the worst of the bitter edge off? Or was that her sister? It's been a good long while. Either way, it works. 2 short blanches, and what's left is mild enough for most anybody. Pick the young leaves in spring for salads before the flower stalk comes up. Once the plant flowers, the leaves turn sharper and better suited for cooking down. Roots, flowers, leaves, the whole plant's been used, one way or another, for generations. The root gets its own second life, too. Roasted and ground, dandelion root has stood in as a coffee substitute for a long time, particularly in periods when real coffee was scarce or expensive. No caffeine in it at all, just a deep, toasty, bitter note that scratches a similar itch. Gardeners sometimes treat a thick stand of dandelion as a sign the soil underneath is compacted or a little short on calcium itself. The plant's a deep taproot, and it goes looking for what it needs well below where most other roots reach. Amaranth leaves. Most gardeners who grow amaranth are after the grain, or the tall, dramatic flower heads, and they walk right past the leaves, which happen to be the part carrying the real reward. Raw amaranth leaves carry about 215 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, close to double what milk offers by weight. Cook them down, and that number concentrates further, since cooking drives off water and leaves the minerals more tightly packed into what's left. There's something almost providential about a plant like this, if you ask me. The part most gardeners compost without a second thought turns out to be the part carrying the bigger nutritional weight. Feels like a small blessing hiding in plain sight, tucked into a plant most folks grow for entirely different reasons. It self-seeds with real enthusiasm, which means once you've grown it a season or two, you'll likely have volunteers coming up on their own the following spring, whether you planned for them or not. Some gardeners consider that a nuisance. I've come to consider it a gift I don't have to work for. It also carries a real dose of vitamin K and vitamin C alongside the calcium, one of those plants that doesn't do just one thing well. For eating, treat the young leaves like spinach. A quick wilt in a hot pan with a little oil and garlic does it justice. They cook down fast, so don't walk away from the stove. This is the same plant family that gave the Aztec people one of their staple grains. Centuries before contact with Europe, the seed heads were ground into flour, and the leaves were eaten right alongside it. 2 harvests off one plant, if you know to look for both. Rare. Growing this on purpose for the leaves, rather than the grain, is genuinely rare in American gardens, even though the plant will happily grow itself if you let it. Most of the work here is simply deciding to eat what's already there. Moringa. This is the plant I mentioned back at the start, one almost nobody in this country has grown, though I'd argue more of us should at least try. Fresh moringa leaves carry roughly 185 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams. Better than milk, weight for weight, but that's really just the opening figure. Dried and ground into powder, that same leaf concentrates up to somewhere around 1,500 milligrams per 100 grams, depending on how it was dried and processed. It's native to hot, tropical parts of the world, which means Oregon has no intention of letting it winter outdoors. I grow mine in a large pot on the back porch through summer, and I drag it into the greenhouse the moment the nights turn cold. It's more work than most things I grow. I do it anyway. Beyond calcium, the leaves carry a genuinely useful amount of plant protein and iron, enough that in parts of the world where it grows easily, it's used as a real nutritional workhorse in the diet, not a garnish. Concentrated, that's really the word for this whole plant. If you get your hands on fresh leaves, strip them from the tougher stems and treat them like any other cooking green, sautéed or stirred into a soup near the end. The dried powder works best stirred into a smoothie or a bit of yogurt, since heat isn't required, and a little goes a long way. This is a plant that only really thrives outdoors year-round in growing zones 9 and up. Think the very southern edge of the country. That's most of the reason it's such a stranger to home gardens here, and exactly why I keep mine in a pot instead of the ground. The iron in moringa leaves gets along particularly well with the vitamin C the leaves also carry. Vitamin C significantly improves how much plant-based iron the body can actually absorb. The two work better together than either does alone. Flaxseed, a plant with pretty little blue flowers that most people grow, if they grow it at all, without ever harvesting a single seed for the kitchen. 100 grams of flaxseed carries about 256 milligrams of calcium, better than double what the same weight of milk gives you. It's also one of the better plant sources of omega-3 fats going, which is a big part of why it gets so much attention. Here's the piece most people never get told. Whole flaxseed passes straight through the digestive system without being broken down. The shell is simply too tough. If you want the calcium and everything else the seed carries, it has to be ground first. A coffee grinder set aside just for this job does the trick. Ground flax also goes rancid faster than you'd expect once that protective shell is broken open. I keep mine in the freezer, ground in small batches, and use it up within a few weeks, rather than grinding a big jar all at once and letting it sit on the shelf. It's an old crop. People have been growing flax for both food and fiber for thousands of years, which is longer than a good many crops we treat as modern staples. A spoonful stirred into oatmeal or yogurt in the morning is about as simple as it gets. No cooking required, no fuss. It's worth knowing that flax has done double duty for most of its history. The same plant gives you fiber for linen cloth and seed for eating, which is part of why it's been carried along by so many different cultures for so many centuries. One planting, two harvests, in a manner of speaking. Flaxseed also carries plant compounds called lignans, which researchers are still actively studying for a range of effects in the body. I'll say plainly, that research is ongoing, and I'm not making any claims about what they do or don't do for any particular condition. Dried basil, sitting in a jar in nearly every kitchen in the country and about to make the biggest jump on this whole list. 100 grams of dried basil carries somewhere around 2,200 milligrams of calcium. That's close to 20 times what milk gives you, weight for weight. It's a genuinely startling figure, and I want to explain exactly why, because it isn't magic. When you dry a leaf, you're not adding calcium to it. You're just taking the water away. A fresh basil leaf is mostly water weight, so once that water's gone, whatever minerals were already in there get packed more tightly into what's left. The same reason a raisin carries more sugar by weight than the grape it came from. Nobody's sitting down to eat 100 grams of dried basil in one sitting. That would be an entire jar. A realistic teaspoon, maybe a gram or two, gives you a much smaller number, closer to 20 or 30 milligrams. It's a genuine contribution over the course of a week of cooking, not a single dramatic dose. Fresh basil grows easily in a sunny spot or a pot on the windowsill through summer, and drying your own is as simple as hanging small bundles somewhere warm and out of direct sun for a week or two. Fresh basil, before any of the water's removed, still carries a real amount of calcium on its own, somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 milligrams per 100 grams, already a touch ahead of milk, long before it ever sees a drying rack. Basil's been central to Mediterranean and Italian cooking for a very long time, and I think that's part of why nearly every kitchen in this country ended up with a jar of it, whether or not the cook realized what else it was quietly bringing to the table. Dried oregano, the jar right next to the basil, doing much the same trick with the water weight and carrying its own strong number because of it. Dried oregano carries about 1,597 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, somewhere around 14 times what milk provides, weight for weight. Same concentration trick as the basil, less water, more mineral packed into what's left. It also carries a genuinely notable amount of iron and manganese, which most people never think to associate with a pizza seasoning. It's a perennial in most of the country, which means once it's established in a garden bed, it comes back reliably year after year with almost no fuss from you. Hearty, that's the word I'd use for it. A pinch in tomato sauce, a pinch on roasted vegetables, small amounts used often, add up over weeks the same way any spice does. It isn't a food you eat by the spoonful, and nobody's suggesting you should. One quick clarification. Since the names get mixed up a lot, I'm talking about the dried herb you'd cook with, not oregano oil, which is a concentrated extract sold as a supplement with its own separate set of considerations. Two very different things wearing the same name. It's native to sunny, rocky hillsides around the Mediterranean, which tells you most of what you need to know about growing it, good drainage, plenty of sun, and don't fuss over it with rich soil or heavy watering. It prefers to be a little tough. The Greek word behind its name translates roughly to joy of the mountain, which I've always thought was a lovely thing to call a plant that mostly just wants to be left alone on a dry hillside. Dried thyme, a small, woody little herb that punches well above its size once the water's been taken out of it. Dried thyme runs close to 18 or 1900 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams in most nutrition references, ahead of the oregano we just covered, though a touch below the basil, still near the top of the list. Thyme also brings along a fair bit of iron and a compound called thymol, which has a long folk history in remedies for coughs and sore throats, though I'll say plainly, that's traditional use, not a claim I'm making about what it treats or cures. It's low-growing, woody, and about as forgiving a plant as you'll find in a garden. Drought doesn't bother it much, and it's one of the few herbs that seems to prefer being a little neglected over being fussed over. Strip the tiny leaves off the woody stem before using. The stems themselves are tough and not pleasant to eat. A few sprigs simmered in a soup, pulled out before serving, is about as traditional as cooking gets. Ancient Egyptians reportedly used thyme in the embalming process, and the ancient Greeks burned it as incense in their temples, believing it a source of courage. Whether or not any of that held up, the plant clearly earned its keep across an awful lot of different centuries and cultures. Rare. A dedicated thyme bed is a rare sight in most home gardens, even though it takes up barely any space and asks almost nothing of the gardener in return. It pairs naturally with lemon and garlic in a lot of traditional cooking, and once you've got a healthy patch established, you can snip what you need through most of the growing season without setting the plant back at all. Rosemary, an evergreen shrub in mild climates, woody enough that some gardeners forget it's an herb at all and not just a landscaping plant. Dried rosemary carries around 1,280 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, roughly 11 times what milk gives you by weight. Along with that comes a real dose of iron and magnesium, two minerals that work alongside calcium rather than against it. Calcium's not really a lone worker in the body. It's got a whole crew helping it do its job right. Magnesium, vitamin K, vitamin D, and a plant like rosemary happens to bring more than one member of that crew to the table at once. In a climate like mine, rosemary stays green right through winter, which is more than I can say for most of what's growing out there this time of year. I've got a bush by the back door that's outlived two other plants I babied a good deal harder. A sprig or two tucked under roasted potatoes or steeped briefly in olive oil is about all it takes. It's a strong flavor. A little goes further than people expect the first time they cook with it. There's an old saying, rosemary for remembrance, that goes back centuries in European folk tradition, worn at weddings and funerals both, as a symbol tied to memory. I'll leave that where it belongs, as folklore and history, not a claim about what the herb does in the body. It comes originally from the dry, rocky coastline of the Mediterranean, and the Latin name itself translates roughly to dew of the sea, which tells you something about how comfortable it is with salt air and lean, well-drained soil. Once it's established, a rosemary bush needs almost nothing from you. A hard prune once a year to keep its shape, and otherwise it's content to be left standing through the seasons, which is more than I can say for most of what I grow. Parsley, the garnish everybody pushes to the side of the plate, which is a genuine shame, because it's doing more work than any garnish has a right to do. Fresh parsley carries about 138 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, already a bit ahead of milk. Dried, that number climbs to around 1,140 milligrams per 100 grams, roughly 10 times what milk provides once the water's gone. It's a biennial in most gardens. It grows leaves the first year, flowers and seeds the second, and it tolerates a good deal of shade that would leave other herbs sulking. About as easy a plant as you'll ever grow from seed. Parsley also carries a genuinely high amount of vitamin K and vitamin C. The vitamin C, in particular, helps your body make better use of the iron in whatever else you're eating alongside it, almost like it opens the gate a little wider for the iron to get through. Chop a handful fresh into nearly anything savory, rather than leaving it as decoration on the rim of the plate. That garnish was meant to be eaten the whole time. Parsley's part of the same plant family as celery and carrots, which explains a little of the flavor kinship if you've ever noticed it. In ancient Greece, it was woven into wreaths for athletic winners, held in high enough regard that it earned a ceremonial place, not just a spot on the plate. Curly parsley and flatleaf parsley are both the same plant. More or less, flatleaf tends to carry a bolder flavor and holds up a little better in cooking, while curly leans milder and works well as that garnish everybody keeps ignoring. It's slow to germinate from seed. Folk tradition claims it has to travel to somewhere unmentionable and back before it sprouts, which is really just an old way of saying be patient, because it can take 3 or 4 weeks to show itself. Collard greens, a southern staple long before anybody was fortifying orange juice or adding calcium to anything, and one of the most honest comparisons on this whole list. I'll be straight with you on this one, because I don't believe in dressing up a number to make it sound bigger than it is. 1 cup of cooked collard greens gives you about 268 milligrams of calcium. That's not a landslide win over a glass of milk. It goes toe-to-toe with it, weight for weight, once it's cooked down. What tips things in collards' favor is everything riding alongside that calcium. A single cup of cooked collards carries a genuinely large amount of vitamin K, plus vitamin A and vitamin C, nutrients milk simply doesn't bring to the table in the same quantity. One caution worth repeating here, collards carry some of the same oxalic acid we talked about with sesame, which can reduce how much of that calcium your body actually absorbs. Doesn't cancel it out, just worth knowing. Quick braise with a chopped onion and a splash of vinegar at the end is about as traditional as it gets, and it cuts through the slight bitterness in the leaf nicely. Collards trace back to the Mediterranean and made their way into American cooking through the South, where they became woven into holiday tables and Sunday dinners for generations, well before anybody was talking about them in terms of nutrition charts. The vitamin K in a single cup of cooked collards is genuinely substantial, enough that, same as with nettle, it's worth a word with your doctor if you're managing blood thinners and thinking about eating collards regularly. The large, sturdy leaves also stand up well to long, slow cooking without falling apart the way more delicate greens tend to, which is likely part of why they became a mainstay for simmering low and slow over a long afternoon. Kale, the vegetable that had its whole moment a decade or so back, and then got quietly written off by some folks as overhyped. The calcium case for it is actually more interesting than the hype ever was. Raw kale carries around 150 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, a modest lead over milk's 113. Nothing dramatic. Cooked down into a cup, it actually comes in a little under what a cup of milk provides. I won't pretend otherwise. Here's the part that actually matters more than the raw number, though. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition measured calcium absorption directly and found that kale came in at around 40% absorbed, slightly better than milk's 32% in the same study. The real contrast is against a high-oxalate green like spinach, where absorption drops to around 5%. Kale is naturally low in those compounds, which is why so much more of what's there actually gets through. So kale isn't winning this contest on raw milligrams. It's winning it on how much of what's there your body actually gets to use, and that's a distinction most lists like this one never bother to make. It's an easy grower in a cool climate, and honestly gets sweeter after the first light frost hits it, if you're willing to leave it out there that long. There are a good many varieties worth knowing. Curly kale, the frilly kind most people picture, lacinato kale, sometimes sold as dinosaur kale, with its long dark blue-green leaves, and Russian red, which turns a deep purple after a cold snap. Different textures, different sweetness, same underlying nutrition. Kale had its loud, trendy moment in restaurants and grocery stores a decade or so back, and I understand why some folks rolled their eyes at all the fuss. The hype passed. The actual nutrition underneath it never went anywhere. It belongs to the same wide plant family as several others on this list, which is part of why you'll notice a pattern by the time we're through. Cabbage, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts all share the same family tree, and calcium tends to run through a good many of that family's members. Turnip greens. If you've ever grown turnips for the root and pulled the leafy tops straight into the compost bin without a second thought, this next part may sting a little. 1 cup of cooked turnip greens carries about 197 milligrams of calcium. It's not the flashiest number on this list. Still, weight for weight, it comes out ahead of milk, and it's a plant a lot of home gardeners are already growing without eating half of it. Turnip greens also bring an enormous amount of vitamin A along with them. 1 cup covers well over half of what most adults need in a day. Milk, by comparison, offers only a fraction of that. Small, that's the leaf, when it's young and tender. Wait too long to harvest, and the leaves toughen up and turn sharper in flavor. Worth picking them while they're still on the small side, if you can help it. Cook them down the same way you would collards or mustard greens, a quick simmer, a splash of something acidic at the end. The whole plant was meant to be eaten, root and top both. There's a real waste reduction case buried in this one, if you think about it. Most produce sections sell the root and leave the greens behind entirely, or they get tossed the moment the root's separated from the top. An entire edible, calcium-rich harvest thrown out before anyone thought to ask. If you're already growing turnips for the root, you're growing this one for free. It's simply a matter of deciding the greens are worth the trip to the kitchen, rather than the compost pile. Turnips grow quickly enough that many gardeners get 2 plantings out of a single season, once in early spring and again in late summer for a fall harvest, which means 2 rounds of greens for the same patch of ground. Mustard greens. Last on the list and about as easy a plant as exists for a beginning gardener, spring or fall. 1 cup of cooked mustard greens carries about 165 milligrams of calcium, a modest but real lead over milk. Once again, weight for weight. Not the biggest number we've covered today, still a genuine plant-based source, still free once it's growing. The peppery bite in a raw mustard leaf mellows considerably once it hits the pan, which surprises people who've only ever tried it raw and decided it wasn't for them. It germinates fast, tolerates a light frost, and goes from seed to harvestable leaf in a matter of a few weeks in the right conditions, about as forgiving a crop as you'll find for someone just starting out with a garden bed. A quick sauté with garlic and a little oil, maybe a splash of soy sauce if you're in the mood for it, and that's supper sorted with almost nothing to it. Mustard belongs to the same plant family as kale, collards, and the turnip greens we just covered, the Brassica family, if you want the formal name for it. Different faces, related roots, and it's part of why so many of the plants on this list share that same peppery, mineral-rich backbone. The seeds themselves get pressed into the mustard condiment sitting in most refrigerators, which means this plant's been quietly feeding people 2 entirely different ways: greens from the leaf and a whole separate flavor from the seed, for a very long time. That family connection is worth sitting with for a second, because it means 4 plants on this list today, mustard, kale, collards, and turnip greens, are all, in a sense, cousins, each one taking a slightly different shape from the same underlying stock. Now 16 plants, some of them growing in places you'd never have thought to look, some of them sitting in a jar on a shelf you probably walk past 3 times a day without a second glance, every single one of them holding its own against a glass of milk, and several of them leaving it well behind. I want to say something plain here, because it matters. None of this means you need to throw out the milk in your refrigerator, and it certainly doesn't replace a conversation with your doctor, especially if you're managing osteoporosis, kidney stones, or you're on blood thinners. A fair amount of what we covered today runs heavy on vitamin K or oxalic acid, and that's worth knowing before you start eating any of it by the bowlful. What it does mean is that calcium's been hiding in more places than the dairy aisle ever let on. A good half of what we walked through today is probably already growing somewhere on your property, whether you invited it there or not. And I'd rather leave you with something useful than something flashy. Pick 2 or 3 from this list, the ones that actually fit how you already cook, and work them in slowly. That's a far better plan than trying to overhaul your whole kitchen overnight. If digging through the plants right outside your own door is useful to you, there's a subscribe button down at the bottom of this screen, and I'd be grateful if you used it. I've got a good deal more of this kind of thing coming. A blessing from the soil, every bit of it. That's how I've come to see it anyway. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one. Before you go, which one of these 16 is already growing somewhere on your own property right now? And did you know what you had, or is today the day you found out?